Welcome to the Point Cybersecurity Podcast. Each week, join Petko Stoyanov and Rachel Lyon to explore the latest in global cybersecurity news, trending topics, and industry transformation initiatives impacting governments, enterprises, and our way of life. Now, let's get to the point. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of To The Point Podcast. I'm Rachel Lyon, here with my co-host, Petko Stoyanov. Petko, hello. Good morning.
Good morning. I love having authors today. Like I've read his book so many times, and it seems like I'm almost a little giddy about this. So, do you want to introduce our guest today?
Yes, me too. Okay, so please welcome to the podcast, Peter Singer. Among his many achievements and accolades, he is a strategist at New America, and at Useful Fiction LLC, he is managing partner. He is also a New York Times bestselling author, described by the Wall Street Journal as a premier futurist in national security environment. He's also been named by the Smithsonian as one of the nation's 100 leading innovators, by Defense News as one of the 100 most influential people in defense issues, by Foreign Policy to their top 100 global thinkers list, and my favorite, mad scientist for the U.S. Army's Training and Doctrine Command. And I do want to call out, I know we'll talk a little bit about LikeWar. Sorry for the long introduction, but I love this quote from Booklist. It should be required reading for everyone living in a democracy and all who aspire to. Wow. Peter, welcome.
Thanks so much for the kind introduction and for having me on.
So could we start with some of these new endeavors that you have? Because I definitely want to dig into, the books and your perspective on what's going on today. But I would like to kick off because I found what you're doing with the Share the Mic program and the fellowship. And I would love to kick off with that because I think this is such an important initiative.
Oh, thanks. So I work at New America, one of my nonprofit hat, so to speak. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, New America is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank based in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that I do there is sort of, you might think of as like entrepreneurial. And a lot of our conversation will be around that. And so in this last year, helped us start up a program that essentially is taking a volunteer network to the next level. So some folks who work in cybersecurity might be familiar with the Share the Mic and Cyber movement, which was essentially started to help face issues of racism within the cybersecurity community. And also, how do we figure out how to essentially lift up diverse voices in our field. And what's happened next is we've created a project around it at New America. We're pretty excited right now in that we just had a application process end where we're going to be bringing in, depending on when this podcast goes out, the announcement will happen. But essentially, we're going to announce 7 Share the Mic and Cyber fellows who will be essentially, bringing in voices and research from communities that are not typically well represented in our field. They're going to be working on topics that range from how we've seen cyber threats, in particular, go after minority communities, to someone doing some really cool work on how AI is being woven into disinformation campaigns. We're also, of course, going to have a series of events and the like. And basically, the background of thinking about it is, one, there's the value proposition, why do you need diversity in the field? And then there's a second, which is, okay, what is it that we're trying to do about it? On the why, people could have a whole conversation around the politics of it and how it's the right thing to do. But we can also just be very utilitarian about it and say, look, cybersecurity field, one, doesn't have enough people in it. And so if you are not pulling in from diverse communities, guess what? You're making that people problem even worse. There's a second part, which is all the research shows that diverse teams are more effective teams. They bring in different insights. They bring in different perspectives. You can't come at a problem, whether it's a I'm writing software or I'm trying to understand a threat. You can't come at it with a bunch of like-minded, experienced people. That's just not, again, we can point to Harvard business studies on that and the like. So, again, it's the right thing to do, but it's also, if you just want to be very selfish about it, it's also the right thing to do. What Share the Mic is that there have been a lot of efforts to go after this. Most of them have been focused on the early part of the pipeline. How do we draw people into the field? How do we, for example, recruit at universities and colleges to draw different people in? Right. That's great. They're phenomenal. What we're focused on is how do we support people already in the field? And so that's what the Share the Mic in Cyber program is all about.
I can't tell you how I guess energized I am to hear about this program. It's, diversity of thinking is just absolutely critical to innovation. And you talk about, you think of all the inherent bias, right? And if you don't have that diversity of thought as you're building things like AI and, you can really, really create a lot of problems that are very long-term and reaching. I mean, Pekko, you know this. I mean, you're a technology engineer. I mean, you can speak to this probably better than I can.
You use the right word right there, diversity of thought. If we keep trying to hire the same people with the same tools, everything, if all they have is a hammer, everything's going to look like it needs a hammer. So we need diversity of thought to solve different problems in different ways. And that means hiring differently. That means bringing in different backgrounds and just, look at it's kind of funny. When we look at cyber, we always want the engineer, or we want this. And then we find out some of the best open thinkers are folks who actually have a degree in music, or they have a degree in philosophy, or
medieval history,
Russian studies, medieval history. Yes, exactly. So I love the fact that you're looking at it from a standpoint of not just the pipeline, but there are folks who we have today that we have to bring in. So
100%. And the conversations that your campaigns have been leading, I think are fantastic. I mean, what's been some of the feedback to that?
So it's been really interesting. The overall network just finished up its event series around, as you and I are speaking, it's the very last day of October. We're all cyber aware now, thankfully. But we had an event around that was framed around the theme of belonging. And so, again, it's not just like, how do I draw people into the field? It's how do I make people who are in the field feel like that there's a place for them in it. And that matters, not only for retention, how do I keep people in the field, but also, of course, it circles back to the recruiting issue. Are people going to want to go into the field that they don't see others in thriving? So there was a variety of events. And then also one of the things in Share the Mic is that you pair up voices with, large social media following, and then they exchange with people from diverse communities and highlight them. And the numbers on it were amazing. There was over 40 million, basically people clicking on, seeing content related to Share the Mic in cyber, which, 40 million is good on any topic.
Wow.
It's really good on cybersecurity. And I think it points to there's something here. And so, again, that's the overall network. And then what we're doing at New America is the next stage of it, which is, how do we take this network and turn it into something kind of more permanent, and also support individual research, individual people that are creating projects, event series. It's been awesome. And then we're, of course, doing it with a series of partners that have ranged from big to small tech firms to nonprofits. And so I'd say, if anybody's interested in linking up with the program, please follow up at Share the Mic in Cyber at New America, and you'll be able to find it via, all the different tools. Are we allowed to say you can Google it? And so again,
absolutely, we'll include a link, Peter. We can absolutely include a link to it, because this is so important. I love this so much.
And again, I'm excited by what are going to be the products of the research. So, we've got these folks that are joining. They're going to spend the next several months doing everything from the research to creating projects. So there's a mix of academics to government policy people to people with business backgrounds. And then along the way, there's going to be professional development offerings for them. So the idea is that you get the fruits of the work probably coming out, they'll be joining in the fall. We'll get the fruits of it in the spring, but also they'll get some, long-term career aid, hopefully.
We'll have to follow up and see what the outcome is. I'm kind of curious for research.
Yeah.
And I love that you're putting in there the government policy aspect, because it seems like you really can't have these kind of initiatives without that element today. Otherwise, how do you really facilitate change or help drive change?
Yeah. And again, it points to the very nature of this field.
Right.
You can't, and this is what Petco's talking about, coming at it from different perspectives, one of which is, you've got to come at it from the perspective of policy, from the perspective of the corporate side, and also the research side. It's got to be bringing, and by the way, the broader community around it. So, to put it differently, tell me a cybersecurity problem that's only about the .com or about the .gov or about the .org or the .edu. Yeah. You want them all in there.
Well, here, let's take that a little broader. Tell me one that's only within the U.S., that's only within a certain country. Like, there is no boundaries.
Yeah, bingo. Or at least if it's, it might be something that's playing out in, it's about a U.S. government policy or something like that. But even in that, you want to learn from other nations, so how have other nations done it well? How have they done it poorly? Rather than looking at everything in isolation.
Absolutely. Not to dominate the conversation here, Petco, but I do want to dig into LikeWar, but and also kind of how it dovetails in what we've seen in Ukraine and Russia, but also more broadly speaking, as folks like Elon Musk, they purchased Twitter, but I guess my first question out of the gate, though, to kind of dovetail into all of this, Peter, is, does a cyber war ever end?
Does it ever begin, actually?
So a war, it's like any other relationship. It depends on both parties agreeing that it ends. So if you think about it, someone can say, I break up with you, and the other person in their mind could still be like, we're dating and still acting inappropriately or whatnot. So it's the same thing in, not just a cyber war, but a traditional war. It's both the winner winning, but it also depends on the loser agreeing that I have lost and hostilities have ended, and I will not, do my best to keep this going. So, one, we got to go back to what's the definition of cyber war? And that's a whole broader debate. Yes. Peter Singer's definition of it is that it turns on how we think about traditional war, which is that it's what brings together politics and violence. That's what distinguishes, murder from in war. The act of killing. It's that dose of politics. In turn, there's a variety of things that might be political in nature, but don't reach the level of war because they don't involve that mass violence part. So on cyber war, it's, we're bringing in the digital element to add to politics and violence. And so then we can have a broader conversation around, there's the formal definition of cyber war. Arguably, we really haven't seen it yet. Versus the broader way we use the term war, Cold War, war on terrorism, right? It's sort of a state of broad conflict. And that we've definitely seen. And obviously, we can have you mentioned Ukraine. We can have a longer conversation around, Russia, its cyber warfare towards not just Ukraine, but, democracies around the world didn't start a couple of months ago. What it's done in Ukraine is been, it's building upon what it's done more broadly. Just like, frankly, a Ukrainian would say, yeah, the war with Russia didn't start in 2022. We were invaded, back in 2014. Right. So again, it's part of this. People want to kind of have debates around the meaning of terms, but I think we know what we mean when we say cyber warfare in Russia. We're talking about not Russian cyber criminals trying to rob banks. We're talking about Russian government using a variety of state and non-state, including even criminals, to attack other actors for primarily political reasons.
I'm curious on the definition of cyberwar, just because using that example you had about the dating, you're breaking up, it's over. I also think, at some point, one side becomes passive aggressive usually, and you start feeling it. And it's almost the same way with cyber. One side starts attacking first, you just don't realize it before you say it's a war.
Well, I'm giving that example of like, it's a illustration of a horribly toxic relationship, right? One side says we're broken up and the other's like, no, we're not. And here's all the awful things that I'm going to do to make sure, right? That's kind of what I was going after there, maybe in a not so perfectly phrased way, but it's the idea of war just doesn't end. It involves the two sides agreeing that it's over. And then the danger to continue with that parallel is like, what if one side says, no, it's not, and then basically starts doing all these other, using other means, parallel here in cyber. And then we've got also, what I'm trying to get at is also kind of the norms and the laws. So there is, in warfare, there are things that you can do that no one is happy about, but the two sides are at war with each other. It is not seen as inappropriate that one side drops a bomb on the other side. That's what happens in war if both sides are engaged in war. But what happens when it's one side engaging in war and it's the other side that is not, right? So then we are not in a formal agreed upon state of conflict, but one side is still using the tools of war. Again, trying to make that parallel to like human relationships. One side is like, we are not dating. And the other side is, well, I'm still going to do all these things that I'm still calling you up. I'm still whatever, right? And so it's the parallel here of like, when we think about the longer context of, we'll use right now. Ukraine and Russia are very clearly at conflict. And so when Ukraine hacks Russia and Russia hacks Ukraine, no one goes, oh my gosh, hacking is off limits. However, when it was, before, or if it was use Russia going after critical infrastructure in states that aren't a party to the conflict, targeting critical infrastructure, we've seen this maybe in Norway and the pipeline. That's like, whoa, no. That's not within the agreed upon norms and even laws of conflict. And so there's that mutuality is what I was trying to get at.
So on the other means, I want to dig into that because it almost reminds me of, I might not be directly attacking you, but I might be using social media to attack you. And I think that's the premise of the LikeWar is they might be attacking us, but we're not acknowledging it, and they're doing it in other ways. What lessons are you seeing that's coming out of like the Ukraine war when it comes to social media and others?
Sure. So the LikeWar project was actually a book that Emerson Brooking and I started many years back. And essentially, we started out trying to figure out how social media was being used in conflict zones. And remember, this is, it's back in time, social media originally was supposed to be this sort of light, airy place originally for fun, and then it becomes for profit. And there's this attitude towards it that, it can therefore only be for the good. And the creators, the tycoons behind it, well, they're only for the good. My how things have changed, right? And so the book essentially came to the conclusion that if we thought of back to what Rachel asked about cyberwar as, all about the hacking of networks, it now had an evil twin, and we called it LikeWar. And LikeWar was about hacking people on the networks by driving ideas viral through their likes, their shares, but also often their lies. And much like on cyber, in terms of kind of the traditional side, and it's funny to say that, but we really need to accept that we've been at the cybersecurity field now for about 2 generations, right? But much like on the cybersecurity side, it's really about the real world impact, right? So you're breaking into a network to steal banking information because you want to make money out of it, right? Same thing, you're driving ideas viral because you want to have some kind of effect on the world. And it might be a positive effect, ice bucket challenge.
Right.
It might be a negative effect, ISIS propaganda. And so that's what the book was all about, and understanding the rules of it. And yeah, you've hit it. Ukraine, it's been woven into it in nearly every way. I think what's interesting is how the lessons from the social media weaponization side has actually kind of paralleled what's played out on both the cybersecurity side and also on the conventional war side. And bluntly, Russia flailed because it tried to fight the last war where it was pushing against an open door to turn it into a rhyme. So that was the case on the conventional military side. The types of operations that were easy for it in 2014 were not easy in 2022 because the Ukrainians had planned for it, had equipped for it, had trained for it. They were ready. Same thing on the cybersecurity side. There's been a lot of discourse around, Ukraine shows that cyber doesn't matter. That's absurd. I mean, it'd be like saying in World War II, like, oh, the Germans, didn't win the Battle of Britain, so it shows planes don't matter. No, they had a whole bunch of back and forth with planes. Same thing here on the cyber side. They have massive amounts of cyber back and forth. It's because, much like on the conventional side, Putin, they were using old approaches. Putin set his own team up for a fall because he, kind of caught him by surprise and trying to keep the operation secret. But also the Ukrainians were ready. And oh, by the way, they were ready because they were getting aid from the US government as well as corporations that they weren't getting in prior years. Right. And it's the same thing on the social media weaponization side, where, the story has been Russia trying lots of different operations, flailing at it. And actually, it's the reverse, where Zelensky and the Ukrainians are the ones that, basically turn the tables on the supposed Russian masters of information warfare. And they do it by following, all the lessons that we had in the LikeWar book. And it isn't like that we came up with the lessons. It's these lessons that, actors that range from ISIS to Taylor Swift were using. You can see each one of them replicated in what Zelensky and the broader Ukrainian side is doing. It's about pre-bunking rather than letting the other side drive the conversation. So you pre-bunk rather than try and respond and debunk. You see it in having multiple narratives rather than just trying to push one story. The Ukrainians have pushed stories that range from stories of Ukrainian Davids fighting against the Russian Goliath, to stories of martyrs, to stories of another part is that you want to build out your network and build out a shared coalition. So much of what Ukraine has done has not just been about we're the victim. It's here's how you can join us too. It's a big one, authenticity. Social media is a strange place where everything's curated, and yet authenticity is the coin of the realm. And so what I mean by that is, on one hand, it's your Instagram, it's your TikTok of you in your home. That's really you. On the other hand, well, it's you after doing 3 takes with it. It's you doing it with the right angle. But the point is, it's really, really you. And I mean, Zelensky's a master at this, where it's like, here I am out in the front line with my soldiers. Here I am out in the streets while the Russians are striking it. And of course, another part I'll just end here is it's also about contrasts. And so it's not just Zelensky showing here I am. It's by contrast, Putin, I mean, it comes across looking old, distant. He's sitting at the end of this absurdly long table, scared of his own generals. And that's one, I can't help myself, but another one that's really effective in social media is mockery. And again, turning things into a joke. And the Ukrainians and there's broader kind of meme networks around this have basically, flipped the table. And it's not just because people like sharing jokes. It also has a narrative goal, which is the idea of surrendering, of giving up to a side that you've turned into the butt of the joke. It becomes unthinkable. And the Ukrainians have been able to do that too.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch just them tapping into that. And I know Zelensky's got a number of younger folks within his cabinet, his broader cabinet, who have also been 32 years old and reaching out and leveraging Twitter for maximum impact. Which kind of, I don't know, naturally leads me to this whole Elon Musk and Twitter purchase that's happening today. And I was reading some articles yesterday and today, and that he posted something that linked to a fake quote unquote news site. And Twitter as a channel has been very, very powerful. I would say for propagating certain narratives. And how do you see that changing, or does it? With this latest development in ownership change?
So Elon Musk is a internet troll enabled by money, some of it due to his own creativity and skill, right. Some of it due to the timing that he lucked into, some of it due to the hard work of others that he often takes credit for. And a lot of it due to the U.S. government, which ironically he consistently talks about as being oppositional to, but he's dependent on taxpayer money from you and I.
Right.
So he's an internet troll enabled by money who is now in over his head in a business and a legal and policy environment that he cannot just bluster and tech bro his way out of. Hopefully that gives you a nice summary of where I see this.
Right.
And so
yes.
We can, we can deepen it on everything from, the model of being a internet troll. I say something blustersome to draw attention, and then I go, I was just kidding, and I'm the victim. How dare you attack me? And that has worked. But now that you are the owner of the company that's responsible for it, you see, hold it, whoa. And we saw this, he pushed out a very clear and frankly kind of hateful falsehood in the wake of a violent attack. Mm-hmm. And then he, very different than and this is the thing with, trolls when they get, he takes it down without comment, because previously he could have doubled down and argued about it. Right. Whoa, hold it, now I own the company. To we can talk about the business model side. I don't care if you are the biggest fan of him in the world. I think we can all agree that the price that he paid for this company based on what happened to the market is well over what it would have been. To the understanding it, you're not just going to be able to solve the problems and turn it into profit by saying, I'm going to get rid of 75% of the people. Well, good luck. Somehow you're going to keep the 25% best. That's not how it works. But more importantly it's sort of this assumption that I understand the way, I'm smarter than everybody else. Everybody in this company that's tried to do things, they don't understand. I get it. To the policy side, the very, very complex issues that surround what's allowed or not, moderation policies, et cetera, to larger questions of, he's got to figure out in the next couple of days, what's the company's stance on Section 230, because it relates to Supreme Court cases. Again, you cannot just bluster your way around these. And it's going to be, we'll just say, interesting to see. And that, of course, the interesting is, what maybe he can somehow turn it into living up to the price that he bought it at. Very, very unlikely. But he's rich enough that I don't think that won't harm his bottom line. I think a different question, again, policy environment, if we want to talk about, what does it mean to have the owner of a incredibly important channel of communication to be almost wholly beholden to China an authoritarian regime for large amounts of his current wealth.
Right.
What I'm getting at there is much of his wealth is, within Tesla. The Chinese government has Tesla and therefore Musk and we won't use the term on this podcast, but basically at a change of mind, the Chinese government can essentially shut down manufacturing, as well as a key location for that company ever becoming profitable.
Right.
So what does it mean to have a major communication network that an authoritarian regime let's be honest, an adversary of the United States can apply pressure to the owner of it? I could go on and on. Some really interesting questions to move forward. We'll just leave it as interesting.
I'd be interested in seeing, if we get an unlike button, I'm kind of looking forward to that. But I'll just ingest, but definitely interesting. Just bringing it back to...
Well, but again, there's an example of like something that, has been floated, but then people who actually and this is not knocking you, Patrick, it's like, this is, there's actually teams of people within these corporations that explored that tested that. And they found, guess what? What will happen is that it gets weaponized, right? That people, brigade up to dislike things. And so, there's reasons, stuff that he would float as if like, oh, we could just do this. I'm going to deal with the bots. And you're like, you don't think like teams of really smart engineers and or lawyers that wrestled with it didn't look at this? And, there's a funny thing of like, the other funny thing is he, fired the legal team from Twitter, which actually just kicked his ass in court, which is why he had to buy the company at such a higher amount. Remember, he tried to get out of it. You'd think he'd say, wow, those lawyers that beat me are better. I should keep them.
Yeah. Nope. I wonder, because this is such a difficult challenge that we're facing. How do you get ahead of this? And I think about kind of the future of social media, Peter, and I'd be interested in your perspective here. Do we see perhaps a movement ahead of people just kind of sick of the trolls, sick of the hate, the vitriol, and we start moving into more, when you talk about authenticity, do we become like smaller private, social groups, right? With people that we know and trust. And does that become a discourse in the years ahead versus these, massive like TikTok and Twitter, when you literally just don't know who you're engaging with? You really don't. And
yeah,
the effort
really
to validate content, I go to like 5 or 6 different sources that I quote unquote trust to validate something that I've read on Twitter. And that's kind of crazy or not. I don't know.
Yeah. It's a great question. And, I think we're only sort of right now figuring it out. One, which I think you put your finger on is what's happening to social media, a lot like what happened to the overall internet, where,
right.
The idea was that originally it would be this, massive ocean that we all were connected into. And instead, it's become a series of smaller lakes and ponds,
right.
So you have the internet, but the internet that you and I are on is a different one, so to speak, than what a billion people in China are on. Exactly. The internet that, someone in Turkey is on the same internet, but because of the legal code, what they can see, what they can post is different than you and I. So that's happened with the overall internet. And it seems to be the same thing is happening on the social media part of it. Some of it, as I mentioned, is because of that, the government intervention side. So, one of the challenges we talked about, Ukraine and Russia. So yes, Ukraine most definitely won the battle of narrative within Ukraine. Zelensky was able to essentially, he was at a 23% level of popularity at the start of the war. He's at a 91% level of popularity within Ukraine. He was able to rally his own nation, but even more importantly, he was able to rally, gain support. Hashtag support Ukraine, I stand with Ukraine, all that goes viral. And that's why nations, governments everywhere from not just the US, but to Japan, to Australia are sending aid to Ukraine. Right. On the other hand, I stand with Ukraine is not trending on VK inside Russia, because VK, the more popular social media platform, is, controlled by government intervention. So you've got that. But then I think what you're putting your finger on is that the same thing may be happening to the platforms within due to kind of natural generational changes, what people are looking for, but also politics, right? So, as much as he wished, Facebook is out there, it's still incredibly popular, but it's popular among a certain set of people for a certain set of things. I'll be blunt. My observation, it tends to be mostly for older. There's a lot of sharing of pictures with your grandparents. And then, yes, the grandparents get their political news and misinformation from it. By contrast, yes, you have Twitter, but you also had, creation of everything from Truth Social to people are on Instagram more for and TikTok more for video and entertainment. I think, and so each one is sort of starting to reflect what people are looking for, and they also are reacting to kind of the political tenor of it. I think the worry for Musk on Twitter is that it has been primarily a rapid news source. Its impact on the world has mostly been from because that's where journalists are getting their news. That's where we get the by the minute and other people kind of comment on the news. Over the last 4 or 5 years, Twitter essentially did a fairly good job of moderating out the worst of the worst, the neo-Nazis. Remember, there was one point in time where like ISIS was all over Twitter. I mean, and so if Musk allows that back in, a lot of people are going to say, you know what, I didn't want to be on Parler. I didn't want to be on Truth Social. I'm going to go somewhere else. And maybe they just only want to go somewhere, happy and watch TikTok videos, or maybe something else comes along. You remember MySpace once ruled the world. But I think, what you're getting at is that it's kind of this, mirroring of what happened to the overall internet seems to be happening a little bit with social media. And oh, by the way, that means the stock valuations or the profitability, if they're private, of these companies is a lot harder if you're not growing. If you can't dominate the world, it's not the business that people hoped it would be.
Yeah.
Isn't social media I've noticed that social media encourage you to stay informed, stay connected, like keep scrolling. You can never get off it. So in almost a way, it's feeding you data using AI in order to keep you engaged. And I'm wondering,
absolutely,
and that creates like an echo chamber if you think about it, because I like certain things and I might connect with other people that like that thing, and I might stay engaged in that little echo chamber. And then we end up, to Rachel's point, is we create little islands within the social media. One thing I noticed with Zelensky, which I was actually if you've ever watched him in different languages, he doesn't just speak in that language. He'll actually change his whole body language to reflect the nation, the country, the way so he creates unique content for each echo chamber, if you think about it.
Yeah. And so you hit it exactly right, is that on one hand, the platforms, again, whether we're talking about Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you have two things at play. You've got one, the natural human inclination to find people that agree with us, that look like us, that think like us. It's called homophily. And that's true whether it's politics to if you, and I feel sorry for you right now, are a Green Bay Packers fan. You are drawn to the content that they put there. And when they post something, you go, oh, I like that. I like the Packers too. I like the Democrats or Republicans too. And so you're drawn to that. And then the second thing is the very business model. The algorithms push content that you are more likely to engage with, because time on platform means more money, more clicks, more engagement means more money. And so it's those two things coming together that create exactly what you're talking about. And they can be a force for good. Oh, my friends and family are doing Ice Bucket Challenge. Ice Bucket Challenge is trending. Let's do it too. And that raises, money for a good cause. Or it can be for something, really pernicious, and pushing us all into our little echo chambers. I think to turn this a little bit more to, what can we do about it? It's not all going away. And so you need, one, there's some absence of regulation in this space. I think, like in the regular field of cybersecurity, Europe tends to be leading the way compared to the United States. And that happened on liability and info sharing. Right. Same thing's going to be happening on cybersecurity. Same thing's happening on social media. The second, though, is it's about the targets. And just like in cybersecurity, you need awareness. So if you're a corporation, you should not be solely looking for classic cyber threats. You should be looking for, how are people going after my brand on social media? Because quite honestly, there's been multiple cases where the cost to a corporation has been greater from a social media attack than it's been from a ransomware attack. And so you need to be wargaming it, preparing it, all the threat awareness part of it. But also it's about you and I. And so the same thing in terms of, hey, stop clicking that link. Same thing on the social media side. We need a little bit more training on how to be called digital literacy. And again, it's not going to solve the problem, but it will create an ecosystem that's safer.
Absolutely. I'm mindful of time, Peter, but I did want to give a quick shout out to Useful Fiction. If we could close the podcast, I would love for you to share with our listeners what you're doing with Useful Fiction.
Oh, thanks. So Useful Fiction is both a methodology and a business. So the idea of Useful Fiction is whether you're trying to share a white paper, a threat report, a briefing to your board, something that's really important. You got two tasks. You have one, which is, how do I analyze? How do I understand this really important thing? But there's a second task that we don't pay enough attention to, which is, how do I gain and hold the attention of my target audience when there's so much else competing out there for mind and media space? And so what we do is that we bring in the oldest communication technology of all, which is story. We've been using story since, we were gathered around a fire in a cave. By contrast, PowerPoint started in 1987. Why do we keep using that? Our brain isn't tailored for it. And so the idea of it is, how do we blend nonfiction analysis, whatever is the important thing to that organization, but share it through a scenario, share it through a story. And a different way of thinking about it is that it's like what I do to my kids in the morning. I sneak fruit and veggies to them through a smoothie. It's the same thing, whether it's a board briefing or it's your workforce. We take the kale, the threat report, the strategy report, the trend report, but we share it through story. And not only, like the smoothie, they're more likely to consume it. Right. It's also, the science shows, they're more likely to absorb it. Same thing with smoothies, same thing when you put the information in a story. And so we've done this. It started out, bluntly, as a little bit of a side hustle between myself and August Cole. We had written together a book called Ghost Fleet that was a novel. Some people may be familiar with it. It was a novel, but it also shared real world issues about cyber threats, supply chain security, you name it. And it turned out to be the most influential work of our careers. I mean, it was it sold well, but more importantly, we were asked to share its real world lessons everywhere from the White House to the Nobel Institute. There were 3 different government investigations launched to keep things that happened in our novel from coming true. Wow. And so we took that methodology and turned it into a business. And we've been at it a little over a year. It started out as one would call it a side hustle. Mm-hmm. And now we just signed our 43rd contract. We've worked with organizations that range from NATO, U.S. Special Operations Command, British government, to a couple of Fortune 500s, to a couple of nonprofits. And we basically work with them in turning, whatever is their really important content into something that people are more likely to engage with. And people, it might be their board, it might be young lieutenants. And then the other thing that we do is that we run training workshops on how to do foresight and communication skills more effectively. And same thing, we've done them for groups as small as 15 to groups as large as 200. And so we bring in a teaching team that ranges from retired 4-star generals to futurists to best-selling authors, reporters, to we've had people behind Hollywood projects like Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead, Band of Brothers, you name it. And basically the team is all about helping that organization figure out, hey, what are the stories that we're not telling well, and how do we better tell them? And so it's been a blast for me to work on these different projects, that have been on topics that range from defense to cyber, but try and figure out how to tell them in a story. But then the other thing is, and you and I were joking about this, it's also led to a little bit of growing up and angst of, when you, I think a lot of folks in your audience are sharing in this of like, there's some really cool, interesting issues to work on. And then you also have the meetings like, okay, what's the company insurance policy going to be? So that's the story of useful fiction. And if people want to check it out, it's useful-fiction.com.
So no longer a side hustle.
Can I just say that's genius? Yes, it's a genius side hustle. I love it.
No longer a side hustle, though, when you're talking about insurance. And bringing in 4-star generals and briefing 200 people. That's awesome that you've taken what you love to do and you've now, gone beyond just being a perfect writer and, helping organizations, tell stories and solve problems.
Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on and just a fun conversation to share about these issues. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. And thank you again, Peter. Really appreciate your time and insights. And I love everything that you're involved with. It's so needed right now. So thank you, because we need more people out there doing something about it versus just kind of, talking about it. So thank you for the action. I love it. And to all of our listeners, thanks again for joining us this week. And until next time, be safe. Thanks for joining us for the To The Point Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by ForcePoint. For more information and show notes from today's episode, please visit forcepoint.com/gov-podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, or Stitcher.